And let me go ahead and share my screen on the presentation, and we will get started. All right, this week's topic, and please don't let the topic scare you away. There's so much power in this week's topic, is the secret weapon for boosting your restaurant profits, the operating budget. Now, don't let that word budget, it's kind of a dirty word, scare you away. It is the best way to plan the future success for your restaurant. Many independent restaurant owners, you rely on your gut instincts to run your restaurant on a month-to-month basis, while the big chains, the big restaurant groups, they plan, they budget, and they win. And today we're going to transform how you manage your restaurant's finances with a practical approach to budgeting that puts you back in control. So let's move on with why the operating budget is a real game changer for you in running your restaurant. It's your financial GPS, a well-crafted budget. And I want you to think of a budget as a plan. A well-crafted budget and plan tells you where your business is heading and how to stay on course, eliminating financial guesswork. The operating budget is your plan for the next 12 months. And the way that we use the budget, it is continually rolling month over month, and you're always looking out the next 12 months. And we're going to see some examples here as we go through this, but it is a detailed month over month budget, 12 months looking out and a total for the next 12 months. The budget is also your early warning system. When we use the monthly tools that we're going to talk about, you spot the financial trouble before it hits your bank account or before it turns into a major problem in your bank account. You've got time to make the corrections. It's also a team motivator. When you and your team understand the financial goals, have a vision over the next 12 months of where your restaurant is heading, you're playing with a scoreboard. This creates alignment and accountability and purpose. Excuse me, let me take a quick sip. It is also a performance tracker. You can't fix what you don't track. The budget reveals exactly which areas of your operation need attention and need improvement and need your focus to get things back on track according to what you had planned that your business was going to do. Okay. So you want to define success based on your restaurant. Don't rely on industry averages. Don't rely on what your competitors are doing. Define your own success. And what does that mean to you? Does it mean more cash in the bank so you can sleep better at night? Does it mean higher profit margins, reduced personal stress, work-life balance so you're not spending 80 hours a week in your restaurant? Those are all part of your overall operating plan, and the budget is the key tool to develop that plan. So you want to tailor your budget to your reality. What's your concept, your price point, your location, your customer demographics? What are your core values, your customer experience standards, your teamwork experience, your local, whether you're local sourcing or not, so on and so on. Create the plan according to your reality, your restaurant, your goals, your values, so that you have a unique definition of success for your restaurant concept. Without a personalized budget, you're simply guessing at what changes will drive improvement and why they matter to your specific operation. Okay. Now we're going to get into how do we build this budget, this 12-month budget. It does take some work, and you probably want to get your accountant involved in helping you do this. We're going to see with some of the examples how detailed some of this work can be, but it pays off so much. It is the only surefire way to improve your results over last year. So we're going to analyze the past, then plan the future. You're going to start with revenue and then line out prime costs. And then the next slide, we're going to get into your overall overhead costs. So you start with the reviewing last year, the last 12 months. It doesn't matter if you're If this is July and you want to start this process now, you're halfway through the year, it's always a 12-month plan. So you look at the last 12 months. What was your total revenue by category? Food, beer, wine, liquor, non-alcoholic beverage. Identify what's growing, what's flat, and understand why. What's happening in your marketplace, what's happening with your competitors. Analyze the past. Then you want to start to work on projecting the next 12 months in each of those line items. Set specific revenue goals by category. Plan some strategic growth. Are you going to accomplish that with menu engineering, pricing adjustments, special events, promotions, targeted advertising? How do you want to grow your revenue? And that also has to be part of your expense plan. If you're going to spend money on targeted advertising to increase your revenue, you build that increased advertising expense into your 12-month budget. So you've projected out your revenue, then you want to focus on the biggest needle mover, of course, is your prime cost. And we start the process over. Go back and look at the cost history. What is your food cost percentage to your food revenue over the past 12 months? How has it changed compared to the prior 2 or 3 years? What's happening? What can you do to improve those costs? And just last week in our weekly training, we did a session on tools to improve your food costs, exactly that. So you can go back and look at that. Analyze both your back of house and front of house labor and identify efficiencies without sacrificing quality. That's one of the things we're going to focus on next week is how to build your labor budget without sacrificing quality. So you've projected out your revenue, you've projected out your prime cost, then you need to move on to overhead. And again, we're going to see a detailed example here in just a second to make this make a little bit more sense so we can visualize it. But fixed cost on your total overhead and your general administrative overhead, that's a predictable expense that kind of remains constant. You don't have much influence over that except for when new contracts are drawn up, a new lease agreement. So rent and mortgage payments, insurance premiums, internet and technology services, some of those equipment leases, those are fixed. So we know what those are going to be over the next 12 months. And if one of those contracts is up during the next 12 months, what can you do to reduce that cost? Where do you want to focus your attention is the variable cost. Those expenses that fluctuate with the change in your revenue, your projected revenue for the next 12 months. Credit card processing fees, that's pretty much a percentage of your revenue. Cleaning and kitchen supplies, if you're planning on an increased revenue over the next 12 months, how does that impact your supplies expense? Linens and tableware, utilities, especially water and electricity. In what months are you experiencing your peak revenue and how does that impact your utilities? So you do the same thing here as we did with revenue and prime cost. You look back over the last 12 months, what months were there fluctuations in those areas, and you try to project out the next 12 months. And you build that plan. You see where you can identify areas to cut costs. The real power, oh, let me go back just a second here. Shoot, how do I go back? There we go. We didn't finish this slide. So identify what you can actively control versus what you can only monitor, those fixed costs. Percentage-based rent, budget carefully for seasonal swings. We talked about that in some of the other areas. So let's look at an example of a simple restaurant budget. This is a operating budget for the whole year. Now, normally you would want to have this laid out over 12 months. We just want a simple example here so I can show you sort of how these things work and how the budget is a motivator tool for you and your team to implement improvements. So 1.5 million in sales, There's our food costs as a percentage of sales. There's our salaries and wages, back of house, front of house, the overhead as a part of labor. You have your direct operating expenses. These are things that fluctuate depending on revenue levels and things that maybe you can control by creating better buying opportunities. Your occupancy costs, most of these are fixed, and then some other G&A overhead. Now, these are all set up as a percentage of your total sales. And in this particular example, on 1.5 million, they're getting 40,000 to the bottom line. Not very good, 2.68%. Most independent restaurants get anywhere from 2 to 6% or worse. The big chains are shooting for 15%. Okay, so 1 year improvements. Let's look at what happens if you just change some of these percentages. I'm going to hide this column. Let's say you drive your food costs down to 32%. Drive your wine costs from 37 down to 32. Your liquor costs from 30 down to 24. And you look at your staffing and you can drive the cook's expense from 6% down to 5%. And some of the tools to drive those costs down, we covered last week. Next week, we're going to cover how to monitor your labor costs and things you can do to improve your labor costs as a percentage of sales. Let's say your servers can go down from 5 to 4%. And then you kind of look at your overhead. Is there some opportunity to make some small cuts in the overhead? So we put in some small percentages here. These are incremental changes that you want to make over the next 12 months. And just by doing that, you've improved your total operating net profit margin up to 9% and $100,000. And those are realistic cuts that you can make or improvements in your cost. I just hit another column. So that's in the first year. Once you've hit those, then you can start to work on further improvements. And when you can see what these changes mean to your bottom line, you're going to get excited about it. And over the course of the first year, you phase some of these things in by implementing some of the tools that we've gone over in some of our other trainings. So after the first year, maybe you can start to drive the food cost down to a future target of 30%. That's a realistic number. Wine should probably be at 30%. Liquor, drive it down to 20%. Bottled beer, 25, draft, 20. These are things that you can accomplish, and we're not even talking about making further improvements in the labor as a percentage of revenue. And you make some plans to drive that revenue up. It's even easier to make some of these improvements in the labor costs. So just by making some of those simple improvements, $100,000 to the bottom line. All right, let's move on to the next slide. The real power is in the monthly analysis, monthly budget versus actual reviews. You want to run your monthly comparisons, comparing budget to actual at the end of each month and see where you stand compared to what your plan was, your plan for your restaurant, and how things maybe got off track. Are they on track? Are you doing better than maybe you thought you could do? Let's pull in. This is one of the things that we do for some of our clients. Here is what an actual versus budget looks like. And we use a tool to pull this data right out of QuickBooks. QuickBooks has budget versus actual reports, but they're not awesome. So we use a tool to pull this data right out into Excel so we can format it the way we want using the source data right inside of QuickBooks. So we just look at, this is a customer that we look at every month, budget versus actual, and then we look at what's happening year to date. So you can see their revenue is down year to date by 6.5%. There's some things going on with this particular restaurant in their neighborhood and in their city, but it's also sort of it's kind of what's happening in 2025. It's hard to grow your revenue in 2025. It's not impossible, it's being done, but for this particular restaurant, those are the results. And we go down and on a month-to-month basis, we identify variances. We set a dollar limit. If it's under, $500, we probably don't mess with spending too much time on that. If year to date it's consistent and it turns out to be a big variance, then maybe we will look at it and what's happening there and how can we get it back on track according to what our plan was, even though we know in reality we're off a plan because we're not keeping up with our revenue projections. And if we just go down and look at the bottom line, they're doing actual 13.45% bottom line operating profit, and they budgeted 13%. Even though they're below their projected revenue numbers, as a percentage, they're still doing fine. And this particular restaurant wasn't always at 13 or 10+%. Trust me, they were under 5% when we started this process with them about 3 years ago. So that's an example of the tool that we're talking about is running monthly comparisons and using that to analyze exactly what's happening in your restaurant. How are you off a plan and where do we get back on track and make improvements to stay on track? Investigate the variances. I'm not going to read all this. Determine the root causes. What changed? Why did it happen? Was it a one-time event or an emerging trend? Those are the key questions you need to ask on a month-to-month basis. And if you're doing that, you're identifying leaks before they become a flooded basement. Adapt the plan, adjust your budget based on findings. Maybe what's happening in your neighborhood, in your competitive marketplace is different than it was 6 months ago when you developed the plan. Well, the plan is not set in stone. It's a rolling, working, living budget plan that you can change and see how those changes impact your bottom line. All right. Your path to financial control. The budgeting tool, as Marcus Lemonis says, a very successful entrepreneur and has a couple business shows. If you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. The best way for you to know and understand your numbers is to implement this budgeting process and make sure that you're looking at it on a month-to-month basis. So you, as we've already talked about, you define your own unique success metrics. What does success look like for you and your restaurant? Build that 12-month detailed budget. Review the past, project the future, develop a plan. Of course, track the major needle movers, maybe on a weekly basis, your prime costs, and then also track your overhead as it's directly impacting your bottom line. Conduct the monthly reviews like we just talked about. Implementing this process is what we use to unlock 25 to 100,000 K in additional profits for many of our restaurants. If you would like to book a free profit and cash flow analysis to talk about how this could work for you in your restaurant, I'm going to leave a comment below this video that will leave a link to my calendar. Please book a call and I'd be happy to talk to you about how we can make this work in your restaurant or how you can just make it work with your own personnel and your own accountant. Next week is how to control labor costs without sacrificing service quality. Look forward to seeing you then. Have a great week.